So welcome to this video on Loose Fruit from God's Box. Let's check out a bit of what's to come in the video before we get into the features. So Loose Fruit is a unique waveshaper, and I say unique in that we've got two different states, and these address stored states within the memory in the module. So it's a bit like looking up wavetables or that kind of technology. We simply plug an input in, we can take an output from the first state, the input normals across to state 2, which we could output, so we could do 1 in, dual out, or 2 in, 2 out, completely independent in parallel, or we could even patch out 1 into 2 and get some series processing, which we do later in the video. We can CV the state of both of these waveshapers. The first state, just by default, has a 0 volt threshold for detecting the wave and doing the shaping. This is common for a lot of waveshapers. But state 2 has a controllable threshold and a related CV in and depth control. And that's a lot of extra animation that you can have and control over this wave shaping. State 1 gives us kind of undertones, subharmonics, there's almost rectification-like effects, octave down effects. But as we sweep through this, as you'll hear shortly, we get almost different pitches. And you could create a little melody or riff by kind of cleverly sequencing this, even with a static, just droning pitch from an oscillator on the input. The outputs of these states come down to these left and right inputs to a crossfader. And we do get a crossfade CV in and attenuator and a crossfade out. So we can blend between the two states, or we could plug the dry signal into one side and one of the shapers and create a dry-wet blend, or we could just put two separate sounds in, or CVs, and use this as an independent crossfader regardless of the top section. So let's plug this triangle wave into the input, but I'll let you hear it first. That's this green trace on data, and that's what we're going to put into the module. Take our output from the first state, and I'll sweep through these various kind of sub-wave shaped tones that we can get. And you can hear that we actually get different pitches, more prominent harmonic sets in this stored state. So as I said, you could kind of cleverly sequence a little riff out of that if you wish. The input's normal across, so I'll come out of state 2. And listen how this changes when I adjust the threshold. It's like a PWM effect over the wave shaping. Let's explore these different states on state 2. We can go down to the crossfader. A fade between the two. Or as I said, you could use this independently, create dry-wet blends and a whole range of other patching. So this really excels at taking simple waves and giving us more complex, interesting musical wave shaping. But we can throw drums into it. We create these distant noise memories by playing piano loops into it. We can audio rate modulate it. We can create unique CV modulation with it. So there's a lot of patches to get through. We'll get stuck into the demo. Just one last thing to note, there is a timing index in the video description if you want to skip around. So because of the way that Loose Fruit stores its states in memory, and some of these wave-shaped states can give us different intervals, octaves, but not just octaves, there's a lot of kind of chordal tones when you blend this against the dry sound or you mix the two shapers together. So I have a simple triangle wave from Tides coming in, that's the green trace on this scope. This never changes, there's no modulation of Tides until I go and wiggle some knobs shortly. And I'm using the crossfader output that takes both of these states, and I'm using an LFO to blend to the upper harmonics of stage 2 and back down to the kind of sub harmonics and undertones and chord-like tones that we're getting from the first. I'm also using an LFO to modulate the threshold of stage 2, and by changing that, what would be a zero crossing point that the waveshaper would detect, like in most wave shaping circuits, we can quite drastically affect the tone. So LFO to threshold for this shaper, LFO to the crossfade, and some random stepped voltages and a pulse LFO to address these stages as well. Let's just take a listen and then I'll change the input wave. There's a lot of interesting shifts in timbre there. Let's bend this triangle closer to a saw wave at the input. So for this patch and part of the video, we're going to go through a few different things. First, processing different pitches through the two inputs and the two wave shapers. These are panned hard left and right so that we can really clearly hear the difference. There's a lot of interesting tones to be had with this kind of sub-shifting stage 1 and upper harmonics from stage 2 and different pitches going in. We're then going to use these left and right inputs which cancel out these outputs from the wave shapers going to the crossfader. So we could put the dry sound from stage 1 into this side and blend to the now stage 1 distorted version, or we could do the same, putting in the output that will normal to that side of the crossfader, stage 2 to the right. We could put this dry sound in and create a dry wet blend, or we can use this entirely independently. So we'll look at all that, but first let's do the different pitches and the parallel stereo processing. So here's my waveform coming in, an already kind of funky folded skewed waveform from Tides. And here's the two outputs, hard left and right. Just going to change the pitch of this right input. And just play around with the shaping. You can hear I'm getting very different pitches and the perception of these pitches from the shaping, as well as moving the actual pitch of the output on Tides. So there they are, hard left and right. If I wanted to blend to, say, stage 1 from the dry sound, I'd come out of the crossfader. Here's just stage 1 on its own. And I'll put the dry sound into the right hand side of the crossfader. You can see they're the same wave. This is the output of the crossfader on the blue trace. If I wanted this right hand side, I'd I'd simply put the dry sound into the left side of the crossfader. I could CV that to have a CVable dry-wet blend. I could of course use this entirely independently and have my dry inputs to the crossfader. Let's add a little bit of CV to that. And we've still got the independent processed outs hard left and right. There it is all together. So in this patch, we're looking at series processing. So if we were to use both states and both inputs, that would be two parallel sets of processing. Or let the one input normal to 2, but still take both their outs, again would be parallel. Or even taking the crossfader out there, still parallel. One input, 2 different stages, or 2 inputs to 2 stages. But here, I'm taking the input and coming out of stage 1. That's going into the scope, that's the blue trace. The green trace is the input, a triangle wave for now, but I will change the incoming waveform. I'm taking that back out of the scope and into stage 2. So I'm going in, out of 1, into 2, and then finally out of 2 to record, and that's what we're hearing. That's this yellow trace on data. So these processes are in series. So both stages will affect each other. Modulating the threshold results in a lot of different tones. So let's explore a little bit of shaping, and I'll get some modulation and a patch built up to further show this off. Let's try modulating the threshold. I'm going to put 2 independent sample and holds, both clocked at the same rate, into both stage inputs. So we're going to kind of get a quick random fly through lots of different tones. And some are more musical than others, some are more noisy. This would be great for percussion. Modulating threshold again. I'm just going to lower the rate of the sample and holds. So in this patch, I wanted to process some acoustic sounds through the loose fruit. And what we've ended up with is a kind of distant, noisy, tape, vinyl crackle-like memory. Sounds really corny, but a kind of memory within noise. It's all fuzzed up, and I really just want Hainbach to love me, and this is my attempt to please him. All joking and kind of silliness aside, I'll make a video for how this patch was actually put together, but this is processing piano loops through loose fruit and then blending it in with the dry sound and a little filtering and reverb to create just this, noisy, distant memory of what came into it. So let's break the patch down. Here is the input, no loose fruit, no over processing. It's a slowed down granular piano loop. Now sending that into loose fruit, and we'll change the spectrogram over. Here was that dry input. You can see fairly clean, not that many overtones. We go to loose fruit. It's like every bit of broken cassette and turntable-like equipment you've ever heard, and it's great. So here's that left-hand side, stage 1. is a somewhat dynamic and haunting sense of what came in, but it just creates this fuzzy, synth-like, be in a can kind of tone, and I really like it. The right-hand stage, because of how the threshold's set, is mainly letting the signal through, but when this signal comes up loud enough, it's almost like a noise gate chattering when it's not set quite right. We're just getting these little clicks and pops coming through. But I really like that as well. So blending those on the crossfader. Through a little reverb. Original sound mix back in. Some delay on the original sound. And I'm now going to bandpass loose fruit. And filter it. Just get this lovely patch. I'll break this down in a separate video, but that's kind of a completely different approach to loose fruit that I wanted to show you because it just works really well. So here we're going to explore CV processing through the loose fruit. Audio's been wicked so far, but here's CV, and we're currently listening to what will be my input, this triangle LFO from Tides, the green trace on Modulation data. You can hear it simply modulating a filter, that's all that's going to happen in this patch, but taking my modulation through loose fruit, simply this green triangle trace in and coming out of the crossfader, fully left, so this is just stage 1. We're instantly giving something more interesting and potentially complex when we start modulating loose fruit. Let's move through stage 1 and see what kind of shapes we can get from this basic triangle input. It's almost like two triangles mixed together, one slower and one that kind of pings and vibrates the slower one. Let's try some other shapes. It's just kind of infinitely more interesting. Still related to the input, but this complex shaping working on CV. Now let's crossfade over to this right hand section. And because this is creating, well, it was creating upper harmonics in the audio, we're getting kind of faster style movement from this side for the LFO. Let's just slow the input down a little bit. We're getting some sort of saw ramp-like edges and little pings, almost like a folded waveform there. Let's try some other shapes. It's a really nice mix of almost rectified and skewed triangles, giving us, again, ramps and saws. Let's see how that threshold affects this CV shaping for stage 2. So it works great with CV. We could of course use that crossfader to blend between the two outputs. Where it starts to get really interesting, mixing the two together. We can of course still CV those stages, CV the threshold, and CV that crossfader. So it's great as a complex CV source. When you plug a simple LFO in, you could take the 2 stages out and the crossfader, bring a different LFO into stage 2 if you wish, and get lots of more complex, interesting, but importantly related CV modulation out of it as well. So in this patch, I'm running drums through the loose fruit, and then I've created another processing chain with a low pass gate, some Music Thing modular spring reverb, and the God's Box lollipop compressor, and I'm side chaining the compression against the dry drum sound. Here's the result and what we'll ultimately get to, but I'm going to break down the patch and then build this back up. So let's just have a listen. So here's my dry drum sound. An already compressed mix of some analog drum sounds. Now going into loose fruit, I'm just going to remove this modulation. Here's what we're getting. And this is from the mixed crossfader output. I like this kind of almost rectified octave up effect we're getting on that kick and snare. This is just stage 1 with a crossfader to the left. And the hi-hats have got really chunky and crispy there. It's almost like there's some resonant, filtery kind of stuff going on there. Now the right hand side, stage 2, I'm going to modulate the threshold for that, which is going to change the behaviour. Let's do that with an audio rate wave. Really gritty, almost kind of distorted ring mod type tone. But by sending a vocal octave sequence into my modulator, Tides, we're getting musical pitch information alongside this processing. But the drums are obviously completely destroyed. There's a lot of cool overtones. So I'm going to run this through a low pass gate. And I'm just striking the low pass gate with my 16th note clock. But by inserting some reverb after the low pass gate, and then compressing it, taking the dry wet blend on the compressor up to fully wet. We've got ring mod like tones, reverb, nice clicky pumpy compression, a great layer to mix in against those dry sounds. So let's bring the dry sounds back. So that's drums into loose fruit, audio rate modulated with a volt per octave sequence on the modulator, giving us this raspy, distorted, rectified like pitch thing in the background. Running this into a low pass gate to chop it up, into some reverb, and then using lollipop to slam it to death with some compression. And it just gives such a really cool background atmosphere, like I'm running synth lines and extra processing against these drums, but everything comes from the drums. So in this part of the video, we're going to explore feedback. And as I have with other patches, I'm just going to play around first and then we'll break this patch down. And the knobs I'm turning here will be the wave shaping on loose fruit and the feedback. cut the patch down and go through what's going on. Opening this up fully. Have one input, which is this triangle wave, again from Tides. It's first going into this mixer from Vintage Synth Labs, which is allowing me to take a split out and create a feedback path. So my input is triangle wave into this mixer, into Loose Fruit. I'm then taking the crossfader out back into the mixer, feeding the input to create the feedback path. So with this completely droning, let's use the crossfader to send stage 1 back into the mixer and into the input. And you can hear at lower feedback levels, it just adds a ton of grunt and beef and weight to the sound. Of course, putting a VCA in this feedback path so we could dynamically modulate feedback would give us some really expressive and interesting results as well. Let's move the crossfader over to stage 2 and try using that for feedback. A bit of feedback, let's add that modulation over threshold for stage 2. I'm going to close my low pass gates, so we've got all this rhythmic modulation going on again. So that's no feedback. Let's get a volt per octave signal into Tides and play around with that feedback. So in this patch, let's explore audio rate modulation. Have a simple triangle wave coming in, and again I'm coming out of the crossfader so I can blend between one stage to the other or a mix of the two. Now we'll start with sending audio rate modulation into stage 1, and we're just listening to the stage 1 output, and the blue trace on the scope is that output. Now there's no attenuation here, so we could do that externally. Let's bring that rate up. And this kind of look up and addressing of these different wave shapes and harmonics doesn't really respond to audio rate modulation. And it's the same for stage 2. But both threshold and crossfade respond to audio rate modulation beautifully. So we'll start with stage 2 and modulate the threshold. Quite like that wave shape. Threshold in its mid position. Let's increase that attenuation. With the depth foot full, let's play with the rate of the modulation. Tune in some great overtones. I really like that kind of glitch that gave. Let's try a different wave shape. So that's audio rate threshold modulation. Let's try audio rate crossfade modulation. And this is my favourite. two kind of complementary shapes from both stages. In the middle, I'll increase the crossfade CV depth on this little attenuator. And then pull up the rates of modulation. Taking that attenuation off, that's a whole new wave that we're getting. This moving, alive, overtone, rich tone. Let's up the rate of modulation again. Some different shapes. I'll increase that mod depth. So again, audio rate modulation over the crossfader really is pretty cool. So that's it for this video on Loose Fruit from God's Box. Check out my demo for Hainbach, which is a killer 8HP filter, in the description, and watch out for that lollipop compressor video coming soon. It's really interesting to see a waveshaper that's kind of part wavetable addressing, harmonic lookup, pitch note changing, interesting wave shaping stages. Crossfader's a great bonus. Being able to adjust the threshold is something we don't always see on folders and shapers. Just a really nice different wave shaper, good for audio or CV, and a ton of potential, as hopefully this video has highlighted for you. Go to patreon.com/DivKid if you want to support my work. If not, like, comment, subscribe, all the usual stuff. Thanks for watching.